7 things Americans have more than Europeans. My friends, I'm going to take a couple of guesses here, and I'm going with freedom and guns. It's kind of like almost they are connected. Think about it. My friends, the title is really interesting, and I really wonder what Lawrence is going to talk about here. But before I go into that, let me ask you for one thing. If you can leave a like, thank you so much. It's the best way to show support. Now, if you can subscribe, well, in that case, forget about it. You make my day. Have that in consideration. Link for the original video in my description, and let's play it.
You are in the shot. I don't think that they're going to be happy about that. We're on. Hello, I'm Lawrence, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond. One of those memos pertains to the things we own, whether that's money, a house, your soul. We all have things in our...
Okay, things that we own. So freedom does not count here, right? But I'm gonna still go with guns.
Our possession that make us who we are. But after living in the United States for 16 years, I've come to find that Americans are more likely to own certain things than British people are. Same is true in reverse, but that's not what this video is about. Now, if you own a free subscription to this YouTube channel, thanks. If not, do that now.
My friends, all of you have a free subscription because it's free to subscribe.
Oh, sorry for scaring the cat.
My friends,
in the meantime, here are 7 things that Americans are more likely to own than British people.
Okay. Ooh, I didn't saw it, so I'm gonna say pickup truck.
And the first thing that we're going to talk about is cars. And you might be thinking, Lawrence, that's not surprising. You always talk about how America has a really large car culture. And this is true, but I think that ignores the fact that when I lived in Britain, I was far more likely to experience a traffic jam. Why is that, Lawrence? Well, because we have way more people in a smaller area. And so even though there are fewer cars per person, there are still millions of cars. So that probably...
okay, this is fair, but for example, people don't drive in cities like New York, right? To be fair, I was thinking about New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, but driving there is probably really difficult. At least in New York, I have the idea that people don't drive a lot. But again, correct me, my friends, because if that's the case, there it will be crazy. But I understand Lawrence's point here.
Probably cemented in my head a false impression of just how many cars we have in England compared to here. But there's no arguing with facts, even though some of you try. In the US, about 91% of households own at least one car, while in the UK, it's closer to 77%. Of course, Americans don't just stop at one car. They're often juggling 2, 3, maybe 4 vehicles per family. Practically
4 vehicles? Okay, my friends, this is the perfect time to ask you this. Anyone watching have more than 2 cars? 2 cars is very standard. 4?
enough to start a car dealership. This partly explains why in the state of Montana, each resident averages nearly 2 cars. In Britain, if somebody owns 2 cars, they're either a millionaire...
Wait, okay, no, not okay. Each resident, not each family. Okay, never mind. Sorry, wait.
Start a car dealership. This partly explains why in the state of Montana, each resident averages nearly 2 cars. In Britain, if somebody owns 2 cars, they're either a millionaire or a car thief. In fact, the idea of parking more than 1 car outside of your average British home sounds like a logistical nightmare. So while Brits are debating whether to pay for an MOT this year, Americans are hopping into their pickup trucks, SUVs, and maybe even a spare sedan.
Man, I would love to have one. Yeah, I you know what? I'm transitioning into an American. Yeah. Well.
Perhaps one of the...
Wait, a dog? No. Dogs are very common here, my friends.
The more surprising entries on this list is that Americans are more likely than British people to own a dog.
Wait. Actually, I believe I can know the argument here. Because there is a lot of apartments in Europe. And having animals is a bit more difficult there. Specific dogs. Cats are easy. So maybe that could be a reason.
Firstly, I can say that anecdotally as somebody who lived in Britain for a long time and didn't own my own dog, but did after I moved to the United States. Therefore, that's proof. It's just not very good proof. But before we look at the facts again, I have more anecdotes. Because initially, after I moved to the US, I lived with my in-laws who had 240 dogs. It was 3 dogs, but I mean, still 3 dogs feels like a lot, especially as somebody who raised a puppy last year. And yet it feels like it's not particularly uncommon in America. In Britain, as my wife said to me the other day, we seem to have a concern about leaving dogs alone when we go to work, which is fair enough, but I'm, you know, a YouTube sensation and I work from home, so I don't have that problem.
Lawrence, we really need to work on your relatability.
That said, it is one thing to feel that Americans have more dogs than British people. Once again, here's voiceover Lawrence from the basement to give you the facts. Statistically, around 40% of American households have at least one dog, which means that the other 60% have made a mistake. Compare this to the UK, where the percentage is thought to be between 30 and 36%. So why is there a disparity? Well, maybe it's because
Well, that's a big difference, actually. Is maybe it was what I believe 10% at least, right?
is thought to be between 30 and 36%. So why is there a disparity? Well, maybe it's because dogs require something that we as a nation of British people haven't quite figured out. Enthusiasm. Either way, Americans don't just live with dogs, they treat them like royalty. Doggy daycare, pop cups, Halloween costumes, and
What? Wait.
treat them like royalty. Doggy daycare, pop cups, Halloween costumes.
You know, my friends, look, I don't want to bring religion into this, but I always thought this type of dogs, they prove God. Listen to me, my friends. So, these type of dogs, I'm not sure if you guys have experience with them, but they are crazy. They are crazy. They try to kill you all the time, but they are the smallest dog ever. To me, this is means that God knows how to do things. Because imagine if this dog had the same size as a Rottweiler or a Pit Bull or something, we are all dead. But no, it's so small. Shut up. I mean, I don't eat dogs, sorry. But you know what I'm trying to say? This dog proves God.
Costumes. And I was about to say that it all sounds a little bit much, but then I remembered Arthur has enjoyed all 3 of those things.
Shocking.
You're not going to believe this one. When I was doing research for this video, my face turned into thumbnail Lawrence. Because, and I hope you're sitting down for this, Americans are more likely to own a gun than British people.
No way!
Which might sound like sarcasm, but one thing that often doesn't get spoken about when it comes to Britain is we do have guns. It's true. Contrary to popular belief, not all guns are completely banned across the UK. They're just heavily regulated. In order to obtain a rifle or a shotgun, a civilian must obtain applicable licenses and must have a valid reason for owning one. These reasons include sport shooting and hunting, but don't extend
This is the same here.
to firing off a few rounds at midnight on New Year's Eve. And yes, that last sentence was aimed at Chainsaw Jim. However, as is famously known, this pales in comparison to gun ownership in the United States.
But you know what's crazy, my friends? This sounds really bad when I say it for some reason, but I never touch it again.
In the US, it turns out there are more guns than people. For every 100 Americans, there are about 120 firearms, making it the highest such ratio in the world. For sake of comparison,
So this is kind of like cars. You don't have 1, you have 4 at least.
100 Brits will statistically have about 5, which is similar to the percentage of Brits that have been thrown out of a pub. Coincidence? I don't know. So Brits often ask me, "Ooh, Lawrence, how many guns do you see every single day?" And the answer to that is next to 0. Because unless you happen to be friends with hunters, members of the police force, or gangs, people aren't just wielding them on the street, they conceal them in their clothes. I don't have X-ray arms.
Wait, but there is some states that you can open carry them, right? Am I saying something stupid? I believe in Texas you can.
So I just assume that maybe they're there. There's a surprising lack of visibility around guns. And you might say, Lawrence, that's because you live in Illinois where they have strict open carry laws. But the thing is I also lived in Indiana where they don't, and it was the same story. I'm really just pointing this out so that my Aunt Mildred stops asking me if I'm all right. Walking down the street, I think I've maybe seen 1 gun in 16 years wielded on the street, and it was a super soaker.
No, I'm Bible. Okay. I don't feel comfortable talking about guns and having the Bible there. My friends, the thing is, I saw guns multiple times, specific with cops, you know, because sometimes they carry them. But that's about it, basically. In 16 years, wielded on the street, and it was a super soaker. Bible?
Yes, a lot of American households, I would imagine, do own a Bible. And that's
own a
because I
Bible.
think Americans in general, if they are religious, are more likely to wear their religion on their sleeve than we are in Britain, where people, generally speaking, keep that to themselves. I think as well.
Well, but that makes no sense. If you are a Christian, if of course, if you are a Christian, you need a Bible. What is this logic?
We are in Britain, where people, generally speaking, keep that to themselves. I think as well, it's fair to say that Britain is a more secular culture. We've got a higher percentage of people there that I would say are non-believers or non-practicing religious people. Whereas here, while, America doesn't have churches that are 800 years old, it does have churches on about every corner trying to compete with Starbucks. And so Bibles, as well as crucifixes on walls, and maybe a Bible verse or two hanging on the same wall, is just something you see way more of here. Even people I've known who aren't like particularly overtly religious have that stuff on their walls because it's just sort of culturally ingrained. Here's a statistic for you.
So for me, my friend Zira, I kind of, I'm more in the American side in the sense that I grew up in a very religious family,
In the US, nearly 88% of households own at least one Bible. And not just that, the average household owns 4, about one for
Oh, wow. There is something with the number 4, my friends. Oh, wow, 4.
each car. Now, I couldn't find any reliable statistics for Britain, but I did find this. Only 6% of Brits actively practice Christianity or regularly read the Bible. So whether it's a sign of devotion or, a cultural habit, the Bible is clearly a key player in American households. And as for Britain, let's just say the Bible's collecting dust next to that unopened copy of Pride and Prejudice.
So I have 2 Bibles, one for me, one for my wife. If my kid wants to follow the same path as us, it will have a Bible, of course.
Gym membership.
But for some reason, it's weird to talk about religion. Some people don't like this conversation. I don't know why. No one pushes anything into them, but they feel uncomfortable. Sometimes that tells more about you than about people that have beliefs.
Next to that unopened copy of Pride and Prejudice.
A gym
memberships. And some of you
who Americans work out more. Well, I don't have a gym membership, that's for sure.
might be watching this going, isn't America famously kind of overweight and out of shape? And while there are very much elements of that, it's also a country of extremes. We talked about this recently, to the extent that gym culture, just like car culture, just like any other embedded culture within American culture,
Goes crazy in
is
America.
a real thing. You could be
Makes
driving
sense.
through Chicago just down the street and you look to your right and see people working out through a window. And these are not uncommon. But for me, growing up in Britain, I think the last time I went to a gym was at school. Actually, I think that's still the case. I don't know why that is. I think we're a nation of joggers, so we like to work out that way, and cycling. I think our country has the infrastructure for outdoor exercise more perhaps than the United States does, where also I think you're less likely to find a sort of public swimming bath. Like, they do exist here, but in Britain they're far more common, although the one that I grew up with in my hometown closed down, so I don't know how true that still is. I think it's just we have different ways of staying in shape. Statistically, around 24% of Americans claim to have a gym membership, which sounds impressive until you realise that most of us think that leg day is walking to and from the basement, and cardio means bending down to tie your shoelace. Meanwhile, the British approach fitness with a little more subtlety. About 14% of Brits are signed up for a gym, but it's not because they're less active. After all, lugging around 4 shopping bags of Tesco meal deals has its own charm. Why sweat in lycra when you've got the great outdoors and a pot noodle as your workout incentive?
To be fair there, my friends, I think there is more walking culture in Europe, so and that automatic is some exercise.
And yes, something that you might wear at a gymnasium,
Sweatpants.
I remember having a pair of sweatpants when I was a child. I don't remember owning a single pair since then. In Britain, it could be that we're less likely to embrace casual fashion, although I do remember shell suits. Here, sweatpants aren't just the fashion choice of the gym.
To be honest, I don't use a lot of sweatpants, but my wife uses a lot.
Gymnasium goers. I sometimes see people walking down this street in them, or going to the shops, or sitting in a restaurant. And frankly, they just look a little bit silly. although I've just remembered I was wearing a raccoon suit earlier. So what do we think, voiceover Lawrence? Are your observations of Sweatpants accurate? Americans are nearly twice as likely to own a pair of sweatpants compared to their British counterparts.
Crazy.
Twice. And that's not just some stat I've made up. That's a stat that ChatGPT just made up, but it sounds right. Meanwhile, across the pond, Britons seem to reserve their sweatpants for painting the house. It's less Netflix and chill and more DIY and drill. But maybe it comes down to the weather. I mean, Americans enjoy a cozy sweatpant year round thanks to air-conditioned bliss, whereas Brits don't do that. So is this a love story between Americans and their joggers, or just a cultural misunderstanding about what's truly formal wear for a Target run? Either way, the numbers don't lie, even made-up ones. Sweatpants are basically America's second uniform.
Okay.
Not to finish talking about toilets, but we're going to finish talking about toilets, because in the vast majority of...
So sorry, the thumbnail of this video was that America have 2 toilets. I need a good explanation for this.
the more than 10 American addresses that I've lived at, there has been a second toilet. Am I complaining? No, because then you get one to yourself when you live with only one other person. Mine's the basement one. But in Britain, a second toilet within a house, I think would be considered a luxury. And maybe that's
Oh, okay. I thought it was 2 toilets inside. Oh, no. This is coming. Come on.
down to the fact that our houses are smaller or that we don't have White Castle. But I think every address that I lived at in Britain had just the one, which is really bad when it gets blocked and you live with 5 people. According to a
No, I have 2, my friends. And some houses here, at the size of mine, they actually tend to have 3. I just have 2, but some houses tend to have 3. And even small houses, I think 2 is quite normal nowadays.
recent survey, 65% of US homes have 2 bathrooms, compared to just 27% in the UK. Now, that's not just convenience, it's a logistical dream. Imagine never having to queue up at 7 a.m, dodging flatmates in
It's
fluffy
amazing.
robes while clutching
It's
a
amazing.
toothbrush like a weapon of war. So why is there a disparity? Well, it boils down to that thing again, space. The average American home is over twice the size of the average British one, meaning there's plenty of room to fit that extra throne. Although in Britain, we do have actual thrones. Anyway, that was it. I'm sure there are plenty
Awesome.
more things that Americans are more likely to own. If, for some unfathomable reason, you like these videos, then why not help me fund them by becoming a patron of this channel? You can do
My friends, show him all the support. Great video again. Man, this was an interesting one. A lot of things here end up surprising me, but I thought my prediction about guns was really good. You know, I know freedom that did not make the list, but we all know it's true. So, friends, thank you so much for watching this with me. See you guys in the next one. Bye.